Time waits for no one, and Jane Pitt, Brad Pitt's mother, has now passed away at the age of 84. Her passing was not merely the end of a life in the biological sense, but the permanent closing of a door that once held the possibility of being opened. She spent her final years in the quiet solitude of a grandmother who never had the chance to meet all of her grandchildren face to face. Children who carry her bloodline, yet grew up beyond the reach of their paternal family's embrace. She waited, she hoped, she kept silent vigil. But everything she held close to her heart, the words left unsaid, the hugs never given, the stories she never got to tell, have now dissolved into a silence that cannot be named. There will be no reunion, no chance for the children to say grandma, with the full weight and meaning of that word. No more time for the healing she silently wished for. Amid the tensions and separations shaped by adult decisions, a mother has left this world carrying the heaviest regret one can bear, leaving while the bonds of family still hung unresolved, with her grandchildren existing only as distant faces in her imagination. And the most painful truth of all, no one can turn back time to make it right. If there is one figure who embodies both the dazzling aura of Hollywood and the humble roots of Middle America, it is Brad Pitt. Yet today, the conversation is not about blockbusters, not about prestigious awards, nor the glitz of red carpets. Today, we are witnessing a deeply human moment. Brad Pitt, the man who has captivated the world, standing in front of his mother Jane Pitt's casket, saying his final goodbye. It was August 2025, when People magazine confirmed that Jane Pitt had passed away at the age of 84. A seemingly simple announcement, a brief news item amid the relentless current of entertainment media. But looked at more closely, the moment Brad Pitt bowed his head beside his mother reveals a much more profound story, one rarely spoken about. Behind the spotlight is a son raised in rural Missouri, a man who carries the quiet lessons of his father, and a child who first learned how to dream through a name called Jane. In an industry where everything is measured in fame, engagement metrics, and box office numbers, what truly makes someone who they are? What shaped Brad Pitt, not as a cultural icon, but as a person? To find that answer, we must return to where it all began, a middle-class family in Shawnee, Oklahoma. Brad Pitt, the man whose face seemed designed for the movies, once lived in a modest home in Springfield, Missouri, surrounded by cornfields and far removed from the glamour of Los Angeles. There were no personal mentors, no early career shortcuts, no hand-picked opportunities. But there was one thing, a father, William Pitt, who taught him a lesson that Brad would remember for life, one he shared in a 2011 interview with Parade. After a particularly bad tennis match, his father asked, "Did you have fun?" Brad said no. His father replied simply, "Then don't do it anymore." A short sentence, yet behind it lies a whole philosophy. Life is meant to be lived in pursuit of genuine joy. And once you find what brings you that joy, follow it fully. And so Brad, then a journalism student just weeks away from graduating, left college, got in an old Datsun, and drove to California in search of a dream that had no clear form yet, acting. Not because anyone opened the doors for him, but because, in his heart, there was his father's quiet guidance. Never live a life you do not love. And perhaps even deeper, the unspoken rhythm of his mother Jane, who had always encouraged her son to live truthfully, no matter what the world might say. Jane Pitt was never one to appear frequently in the public eye. But every time she did, her presence left an impression. In 2012, she wrote a piece advocating for equal rights for same-sex couples, even when doing so stood in direct contrast to the conservative values held by many around her. It was a clear sign. Jane was never just the woman behind Brad. She was a woman of convictions, of principle, of faith, and of voice. A mother like that undoubtedly left a lasting impact on how Brad Pitt saw the world, how he saw himself, and how he empathized with those often overlooked or marginalized by society. William and Jane Pitt met at Oklahoma Baptist University. A seemingly small detail, yet one that hints at a world of shared values, faith, traditional morals, and quiet dedication. They married in 1962 and welcomed Brad the following year, in 1963. Theirs was not an entertainment family. They had no ties to Hollywood, no background in the film industry. His father managed a trucking company, and his mother was a high school guidance counselor. A practical father, a thoughtful, nurturing mother, the kind of household familiar to millions of average American families. And yet within that modest frame, essential values were planted. Brad Pitt, the man whose face was seemingly made for film, came from a house in Springfield, far from the glamour of Los Angeles. He had no connections, no lucky breaks from childhood. What he had was a piece of advice from a father he respected, and a kind of quiet, unwavering encouragement from a mother who believed in letting her children follow what felt right, even if it went against the grain. Jane Pitt never sought attention, but she had presence. In defending marriage equality, she revealed herself as more than just a supportive parent. She was a woman of conscience, willing to speak out even when unpopular. That courage, that sense of justice, likely shaped Brad Pitt's own compassion, his advocacy, and his sensitivity as both an actor and a father. Since the highly publicized divorce between Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie in 2016, something quiet but significant has been unfolding beyond the media headlines, something few have paid attention to. Their children have not seen their paternal grandparents for a very long time. The bond between 3 generations has gradually faded, not because of geographical distance, but due to emotional fractures rooted in deeply entrenched differences in values and beliefs. Jane Pitt, Brad's mother, was a woman grounded in traditional values, particularly known for her conservative views on same-sex marriage. In contrast, Angelina Jolie, Brad's ex-wife, has long been a public advocate for gender equality and LGBTQ+ rights. These stark ideological differences left no room for common ground between Jane and her daughter-in-law. There was no public statement, no dramatic fallout, but the quiet signs accumulated over the years, reflecting a growing silent strain. After the divorce, Angelina was granted full custody of all 6 children, 3 biological and 3 adopted. Brad was allowed only limited, supervised visitation. Within that context, the grandparents' access to their grandchildren effectively vanished. No public visits. No shared family photos. No evidence of William and Jane Pitt's presence in their grandchildren's lives. And this was not just a matter of months. It stretched on for nearly a decade as Jane moved further into her twilight years. There was no clear indication that this situation would be resolved anytime soon. Even though Brad had shown signs of wanting reconciliation, including visiting his ex-wife's home and participating in custody negotiations, the possibility of his children seeing their grandparents remained beyond his control. When people think of family, they often imagine gatherings, shared memories, warm embraces spanning generations. But when children grow up never having met their paternal grandparents, without any memory of that side of the family, without knowing the roots from which their father came, that absence becomes a void not easily filled. The Jolie-Pitt children were born under the spotlight, yet one side of their family remained in the shadows, kept at a distance not by physical space, but by unresolved conflicts from the generation before them. One by one, these children slowly drifted away from the legacy associated with the Pitt name. The moment when one of the daughters officially removed Pitt from her surname was more than a legal change. It was a silent message that the break had gone too far. This was not a rupture born out of hatred, but rather the inevitable result of personal beliefs pushed to their extremes. Jane Pitt, who once publicly defended conservative values, did so not out of contempt, but because she deeply believed in the principles she had lived by and passed on to her children. Angelina Jolie, who passionately championed LGBTQ+ rights, did not stand in opposition to her mother-in-law as an act of defiance, but as a commitment to the causes she felt morally compelled to uphold. Both women stayed true to their convictions, but in doing so, something crucial was lost: the emotional presence of a whole family. While each was protecting her own worldview, the children, who never had a say, were left to live in a divided reality. Brad Pitt has long been seen as a symbol of success, of cinematic excellence, of global fame. But as a father, he faces a struggle that fame cannot fix. He cannot bring his children to see their grandmother if it violates custody terms or meets resistance from his ex-wife. He cannot enforce family bonds through celebrity status. Despite Oscars and global acclaim, he remains in this situation a father limited by legal constraints and old emotional wounds. He stands between 2 generations that mean everything to him: his parents, who instilled in him honor and values, and his children, who are his greatest emotional investment in adulthood. There is no clear right or wrong in this silent family conflict. In most familial tensions, the line between conviction and emotional damage is often blurred. But one truth stands out: the children are the ones carrying the burden. They never got to choose, but they bear the consequences of choices made long before them. Meanwhile, the grandparents, now in the final chapters of their lives, were denied the chance to fulfill their role, to create shared memories with their grandchildren. When everything else fades, family bonds should be the one thing we hold on to. Yet those bonds are often the first to erode under prolonged silence, when no one takes the first step toward reconciliation. Brad Pitt has said little publicly about this, but his actions, his efforts to reconnect, his quiet sorrow when one child dropped his surname, speak volumes. He does not need to explain. His silence carries the weight of a man who cannot salvage what he holds dearest. In a world where everything private can become public overnight, what he clings to now may be nothing more than a quiet, inescapable regret, the feeling of having failed to preserve the wholeness of his family. If family is where all values begin, then the loss of it is not just a fractured relationship. It is the erosion of trust, of love, of shared memory. Things that cannot be bought back with fame, fortune, or achievement. Few pains cut deeper than that of a father unable to let his own parents see their grandchildren one last time. And few silences feel heavier than that of a child growing up, never knowing who their grandparents were. And now, what once was only a distant concern has become a final reality. Jane Pitt has passed away. She left this world with her deepest wishes unfulfilled. Never receiving a hug from her grandchildren, never sitting for a complete family photo, never even hearing the word grandma spoken to her by those carrying her family's blood. Time did not wait, and now, the distances once seen as temporary have become permanent voids. She spent her final years in the quiet hope of a mother, a grandmother, believing that someday what was right would return. But that day never came. The children continued to grow, but they grew up in a world she was never allowed to be part of. And she left this life with so much still unsaid, guidance never given, hands never held, memories that were never made simply because they were never granted a chance. When a mother dies with longing still in her heart, the loss is not just her passing. It is the sum of all the things that could have been, and now never will be. Brad Pitt didn't get the chance to give his mother the joy of watching her grandchildren gathered under the old family roof. And the children never got to know the woman who loved them without meeting them, waited for them without seeing them, and carried them in her heart to the very end. Between belief, principle, and pride, what was lost forever was kinship, when the one who carried its essence was no longer here to wait for it. Now the silence that remains is no longer just the absence of words. It is the silence of a heart that stopped beating, while still reaching toward loved ones from the other side of an invisible wall. And that is the kind of sorrow no interview, no film, no award can ever soothe. It lingers quietly between two generations, a silence that never should have existed, if only something as simple as a visit, a held hand, or a forgiven word had arrived just a little sooner.